Hello there, Ma'am Elenita. I am Mike G. Fabian from BSL English 2B, and today we are going to discuss the Week 4 module in Literature 1. First, we are going to discuss what is genre. Genre is any form or type of communication in any mode with socially agreed upon conventions developed over time. Literary genres refers specifically to books and writing, as opposed to other types of media, such as movies. Many bookstores organize large quantities of books according to literary genres, such as classics, mysteries, and fantasy. Second, what are the five major genres of children's literature? First, we have poetry. Poetry is a literature that evokes a concentrated imaginative awareness of experience or a specific emotional response through language chosen and arranged for its meaning, sound, and rhythm. Then we have fiction. Fiction is a literature created from the imagination, not presented as fact, though it may be based on a true story or situation. The types of literature in the fiction genre include the novel, short story, and novellas. The word is from the Latin fictio, the act of making, or fashioning, or molding. The third one is nonfiction. Nonfiction is a literature that, regardless of the subject matter, has a simple goal, which is to provide information. It should be based on facts and conclusions of the author's research or expertise, as opposed to the creativity of the author's imagination. The fourth one is drama. Drama is a written work that tells a story through action and speech and is meant to be acted on a stage, like play, movie, or television production, with a serious tone or subject like dramatic art, literature, or affairs. The last one is prose. Prose is ordinary language that follows regular grammatical conventions and does not contain a formal metrical structure. This definition of prose is an example of prose writing, as is most human conversation, textbooks, lectures, novels, short stories, fairy tales, newspaper, articles, and essays. The third topic is all about fantasy. So let's differentiate between high fantasy and low fantasy. Fantasy is a genre of speculative fiction involving magical elements, typically set in a fictional universe and sometimes inspired by mythology and folklore. Its roots are in oral tradition, which then became fantasy in literature and drama. From the 20th century, it has expanded further into various media including film, television, graphic, novels, manga, animations, and video games. The difference between high fantasy and low fantasy is that the high fantasy refers to epic fantasy, which is set in an alternate world. This typically includes lots of magical elements, fantastical creatures, and unusual technology. Whereas low fantasy is when magical creatures and elements intrude upon the regular world. On the other hand, low fantasy or intrusion fantasy is subgenre of fantasy fiction in which magical events intrude on an otherwise normal world. The term thus contrasts with high fantasy stories, which take place in fictional worlds that have their own sets of rules and physical laws. Question number 4. What are the types of fantasy stories, and what are the subgenres and types of fantasy? Fantasy includes a robust and ever-growing number of subgenres, some of which writers combine in their works. There are a few essential subgenres of fantasy. Number 1. Higher epic fantasy. Set in a magical environment that has its own rules and physical laws. These subgenres, plots, and themes have a grand scale and typically center on a single well-developed hero or a band of heroes, such as Frodo Baggins and his cohorts in J.R.R. Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings in 1954. Then we have magical realism. While similar to low fantasy, magical realism characters accept fantastical elements like levitation and telekinesis as a normal part of their otherwise realistic world, as in Gabriel Garcia Marquez's classic 100 Years of Solitude in 1967. Number 4. Sword and sorcery. A subset of high fantasy, it focuses on sword-wielding heroes, such as the titular barbarian in Robert E. Howard's Conan pulp fiction stories, as well as magic or witchcraft. Number 5. Dark fantasy. Combining elements of fantasy and horror, its aim is to unnerve and frighten readers, like the Gargantuan, otherworldly monsters in H.P. Lovecraft's universe. 6. We have fables. using personified animals and the supernatural. Fables impart moral lessons, like the stories in Aesop's Fables and Arabian Nights. Number 7, we have fairy tales. Fairy tales intended for children. These fairy tales and folk tales are typically set in the distant magical worlds, with beginnings like Once Upon a Time in a land far and far away, where trolls, dragons, witches, and other supernatural characters are an accepted truth, as in the Brothers Grimm's fairy tales in 1812. Number 8, we have superhero fiction. Unlike stories in which a hero acquires special abilities through scientific means, such as exposure to radiation, these protagonists' powers are supernatural. Let's move on to question number 5. What is science fiction? Science fiction, sometimes shortened to SF or sci-fi, is a genre of speculative fiction, which typically deals with imaginative and futuristic concepts such as advanced science and technology, space exploration, time travel, parallel universe, and extraterrestrial life. Science fiction can trace its roots to ancient mythology. First, it is related to fantasy, horror, and superhero fiction, and contains many subgenres. Its exact definition has long been disputed among authors, critics, scholars, and readers. Number 6 question is, what is historical fiction? Historical fiction is set in a real place during a culturally recognizable time. The details and the action in the story can be mix of actual events and ones from the author's imagination as they fill in the gaps. Characters can be pure fiction or based on real people. Often it's both. Question number 7, what is realistic fiction? Realistic fiction creates imaginary characters and situations that depict our world and society. It focuses on themes of growing up and confronting personal and social problems. This genre portrays characters coming to understand themselves and others. For number 8 question, what are the types of realistic fiction? So first we have humorous stories. It is a genre in which the main emphasis is on humor. These books are designed to make the reader laugh through amusement and most often work by exaggerating characteristics for humorous effect. Books in this style traditionally have a happy ending. Second, we have animal stories. It is a traditional form of allegorical writing. Animal tales can be understood in universal terms of how animal species relate to each other. For example, predators wishing to eat prey, rather than human groups in a specific society. Number 3, we have sports stories. Sports story is a form of writing that reports on matters pertaining to sporting topics and competitions. Number 4, school stories. The school story is a fiction genre centering on older pre-adolescent and adolescent school life, at its most popular in the first half of the 20th century. Number 5, mysteries. Mystery is a fiction genre where the nature of an event, usually a murder or other crimes, remains mysterious until the end of the story, often within a closed circle of suspects. Each suspect is usually provided with a credible motive and a reasonable opportunity for committing the crime. Question number 9, what are non-fiction books? Non-fiction is any document or media content that attempts in good faith to convey information only about the real world rather than being grounded in imagination. Common literary examples of non-fiction include expository, argumentative, functional, and opinion pieces, essays on art or literature, biographies, memoirs journalism, and historical scientific, technical or economic writings, including electronic ones. Other examples of nonfiction works academic paper. Number 10, what are the types of multicultural literature? First, we have African American. African American are an ethnic group consisting of Americans with partial or total ancestry from sub-Saharan Africa. The term African American generally denotes descendants of enslaved Africans who are from the United States. Second is Asian Pacific American. It is a person living in the United States whose family originally come from the Far East, like Southeast Asia, South Asia, or the Pacific Islands. Third is Latino. It is a person of Latin American origin or descent, especially one living in the United States. Number 4, Native American. Native Americans are people from one of the many groups who were already living in North America before Europeans arrived, especially those groups in the continental United States. Number 5. Religious cultures. Religious faith involves belief and trust in your deity or other spiritual force seen as setting standards of conduct, responding to prayer, and typically assuring the ultimate triumph of good over evil. Number 6. American. An American is someone who was born in the United States or born to American parents. Alternatively, it's someone who has migrated here and gone through the necessary processes to become a citizen. Now let's move on to the next question, number 11. What are the samples of children's poetry books? These poems are perfect for young children to enhance their vocabulary and practice their reading skills. This includes Twinkle Twinkle, Little Star, Baba Black Sheep, The Purple Cow, I'm a Little Teapot, and so many more. Number 12. What are fables? Fable is a narrative form usually featuring animals that behave and speak as human beings, told in order to highlight human follies and weaknesses. 13. What are myths? Myths are stories that are passed down about how or why something came to be. Number 14. What are legends? A legend can be described as a traditional story or narrative that is rooted in a particular culture or folklore. It often involves mythical or supernatural elements and is passed down through generations as a way of explaining historical events, natural phenomena, or cultural traditions. Number 15. What are tall tales? Tall tale is a narrative that depicts the wild adventures of extravagantly exaggerated folk heroes. The tall tale is essentially an oral form of entertainment. The audience appreciates the imaginative invention rather than the literal meaning of the tales. Number 16. What are realistic tales? Realistic tales is a genre consisting of stories that could have actually occurred to people or animals in a believable setting. The stories resemble real life and fictional characters. Within the stories react similarly to real people. Number 17. What are folktales? Folktales are stories in the oral tradition or tales that people tell each other out loud, rather than stories in written form. They are closely related to many storytelling traditions, including fables, myths, and fairy tales. Number 18. What are trickster tales? Trickster tale in oral traditions worldwide is a story featuring a protagonist, often an anthropomorphized animal, who has magical powers and who is characterized as a compendium of opposites. Number 19. What are noodlehead stories? These are stories in which a well-intentioned character takes instructions too literally, usually with comical results. The Amelia Bedelia series is a prime example of noodlehead storytelling. Number 20. What are Mother Goose stories? Mother Goose is often cited as the author of hundreds of children's stories that have been passed down through oral tradition and published over centuries. The first printed publication of Mother Goose stories came in 1695. It was a collection of fairy tales by Charles Perrault called Tales of My Mother Goose. The collection included classics such as Sleeping Beauty, Little Red Riding Hood, and Cinderella. Mother Goose was soon closely associated with nursery rhymes.